Good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Smith. I'm Director of Technology at the Center for Automotive Research. Thanks for joining us for the second day, and thank you, Carla, for the good start to this morning. This session, Early Adoption, Driving Factors and Consumer Acceptance of Automated and Electric Vehicles. Before I go there, I want to remind people we'll follow the same pattern we have pretty much all week. It's an hour-long session. We have 5 speakers, 3 of which we can see on the screen here. They'll join us shortly, 2 of which you obviously see up front. Questions submitted via the Boomset app. And because we only have an hour, we're going to forego the bios. Those bios are available online as well. All of our panelists, wonderful backgrounds. I really encourage you to go look at those bios and read them as you're going through this. With that, I want to take a couple of minutes of opening comments, very briefly. Automated and electric vehicles seem to have this symbiosis. Maybe it's natural, maybe it's not, but it's an interesting, for me, a personal connection. Many of you remember and know Richard Wallace. Richard Wallace worked with our organization for many years. In fact, I worked with Richard for over 20 years. Richard is no longer at CAR, but he's still active and still out there. But through the years, Richard and I went through this up and down situation where EVs were cool back in 2008 and 2009. And Richard wanted the CAVs to be connected to the EVs because it gave them more popularity, hang out with the cool crowd. And as EVs quieted down, AVs became popular. And we've seen this relationship back and forth between the two, and they aren't necessarily, and we'll talk maybe on a panel about this a little bit, they aren't necessarily required to be partners, but they're often thought of partners. So I think as I looked at this today, and again, came in a little bit late on this one, it's not necessarily that we have to pair these up, but they're so often paired up that it makes a real natural connection as we go through this. So today's panel, I'll go through that quickly and then introduce them and let each of them talk for a few minutes, is first to our left here is Stephen Patton, Principal at Ernst & Young. Next, Zachary Bolton, Head of Research and Development, North America, Holistic Engineering and Technologies at Continental. And in a moment, we'll bring up Ryan Reamer, a research scientist, MIT Age Lab. Mark Rosekind, Chief Safety Innovation Officer, Zoox, and finally Maya Pendius, CEO of Humanising Autonomy. And we'll go in that order, and we'll let each of them speak. After we speak, we'll have discussion, encourage you all to send questions. With that, Steve, I'd like you to take.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the introduction, Brett, and thank you for having me today. I couldn't agree more. It seems like we have been having a little bit of a yo-yo effect between AV and EV, but right now it seems like EV is in the limelight.
EV is, so Richard would want to come talk to me instead of me having to go talk to Richard. So I like that. I like him.
You know, if you think about the maturity of EV, it's really been focused on the vehicle, the infrastructure, and then people preferences. And the vehicles are coming along really nicely. The product selection is coming out very well, you know, not only what's out today, but what's out soon. Yes, we have some more work to do on battery and battery densities and battery chemistry and charge time and a lot of other things, but the reality is the vehicle is there, we get more and more consumer acceptance of the vehicle itself, so that's fantastic. Infrastructure is coming along nicely as well, and we're at a point now where we have a lot of players, both the OEMs, third parties, power and utility companies, certainly aided by government incentives. We're building a lot of infrastructure, and the infrastructure is going to be very critical in order to make sure that we can get to the EV population that we're anticipating in the next 10, 12, 15 years. So that one's coming along very nicely too. The thing then becomes the wild card is, will consumers accept electric vehicles? Mm-hmm. And that becomes the challenge of, is that a technology that our consumers want to be driving as opposed to traditional internal combustion? So one of the things EY has recently done is we have a new index that we call the Mobility Consumer Index. And our intention is to truly understand what customer preferences are around the modes of mobility. How do they want to be transported? We are in the second edition of this survey. The first one was back in the fall. We just finished one back in June of this year, so 45 days old at this point. And the current edition really focused on three things. We wanted to understand still how consumers are thinking about post-COVID. We want to see how their changing preferences are around it. No surprises there. Private is still preferred over public and shared, so that's not too surprising. We wanted to talk about EV and consumer acceptance of EV, and so I'll get into that in a minute. And then we also wanted to understand how the retail patterns are changing. How do consumers want to engage in dealerships or online, and how that might be changing. And again, I think we're seeing some continuation of the patterns of wanting one more online experience, but particularly in the case of EV, that first-time buyer wants to be in a dealership and touch and feel and drive the vehicle. It's not a full online experience yet. But on the EV front, some really interesting findings on that. We first of all want to understand how many people are planning on buying a car, and it does feel like we have a bubble coming. A full 50% globally on the survey, and first of all, it's like 13 countries, over 9,000 survey respondents, every demographic group you can possibly imagine, so a lot of diversity in the way we thought about this. But we saw a lot of interest in purchasing a vehicle, and we're up to now 42% globally are saying EV is in the consideration set in the next 12 months. And that's an amazing number to me. 42% will consider EV. In the US, it's a little lower. That 42 is US. In the US, it was like 29% in the US are considering it. But if you think about in 2020, we only had about 2% of sales that were EVs, and we have now 29 in the US, 29% in the US considering it. That tells me we've got a wave coming of acceptance of EV that we haven't seen in the past. So that's great news. The other one, the question is, okay, at what premium are you willing to pay for an EV? And again, good news is there is a recognition that an EV costs more, the battery costs more, at least currently. And so it was a full 2/3 of respondents said that there's an expected premium and they're willing to pay it. 1/3 basically said, I will never pay a premium for an EV. And clearly that won't be in the early adopter groups. But there is a willingness to pay for it. But having said that, so we got EV buyers, they're interested, they're willing to pay a premium, but there are also concerns. And the number one concern across the EV intention buyer right now is, frankly, it's just the overall cost of ownership. And I think that the industry can do a lot to help understand the overall cost of ownership. I don't know if that's real clear to the consumer yet, but there's concerns around, okay, do I have to install EV charging infrastructure? How much will that cost? How much will it cost to charge the vehicle? The second most common reason was availability of charging infrastructure. And so that will come with time as well. But the most interesting thing was of the EV owners today that surveyed in the poll, 23% said they would not buy an EV again. And the overall reason was availability of charging infrastructure, and they felt more comfortable with an internal combustion engine. And I think that is a holistic experience kind of comment that says, I just know what to expect, I know where to get gas, I know how to ride in a ICE. I don't have that full confidence yet in electric. So I think we're getting there. I think the consumer's ready. And our forecasting shows by 2023, we're probably going to be at about a 50% penetration of EV. That's not too far away.
So Steve, is that data available? Can we download? Can we?
Yes, we're still going through it all, and it's right now in a lot of slice and dice forms, but we're releasing more and more every day on our website. You can find it.
On the website. All right, thank you very much. So our next speaker is Zach Bolton, again, Head of Research Development, North America, Holistic Engineering and Technologies at Continental. Zach, we first came into contact about 6 months ago, working on an ill-fated DOE proposal. But the good news is we got a great speaker for Traverse City MBS out of that. So please welcome Zach.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I think I'll stand up. I got to take advantage of being in front of a live audience here a little bit and a real stage. I think it's awesome that we're all here, whether it's short-lived or not, who knows. But when we're talking about consumer acceptance of automated vehicles and electric vehicles, I think trust is something that we come to need for a personally owned vehicle. We've got to be able to trust and know what to expect from that vehicle. And speaking especially on these autonomous systems, or systems leading us towards full autonomy, there's 3 paths we can take to make sure that the consumers are trusting the technology out there. And the first is to educate. We all are a little bit leery and scared of what we don't know. If you don't think that's true, just look at what COVID-19 did. We were all freaking out about what we don't know. Once we became a little bit aware of the virus and how it goes through, then we educated ourselves. We educated the world on different topics. We, not me, the scientists that study diseases. But the point here is that when we educate on autonomous driving systems, or the building blocks of them, these advanced driver assistance systems, you're making them aware of the capabilities, the capacities of their vehicle. They're becoming more trustworthy of adaptive cruise control, lane departure or lane keep assist, reverse backup assist so you don't back into your garage door. I mean, these sorts of systems needed a little bit of infancy to get out there, get a little bit of feel of where they fit, but also we were able to educate with a couple different methods. Obviously here at Continental we have the Safely There campaign. It's a social media campaign to really get as many in the audience as we can educated about the 35 plus safety systems that are out there already, saving over 30,000 lives each year. The next step, though, is to evolve, right? We don't build one thing and it's the palace right away. We've got to start with building blocks. I got a 3-year-old at home, and it's amazing to see her build out of these building blocks, and it's just like we're doing with our way towards autonomous driving systems. I was an early developer in adaptive cruise control, and those were really neat days when I was controlling how a car was braking or adding throttle based on something else, based on the car ahead of me or an emergency situation in front of me to slam on the brakes. That was interesting, but that was only a building block. Then we moved from lane departure adaptive cruise control to doing a little bit more control. Now we can do things behind us. We've got blind spot detection, we got rear cross traffic alert. We can pair that with autonomous braking. So now we can stop a vehicle if we're about to back out of a parking space and get sideswiped. These are all leading up to and building the trust we have in our vehicles and the trust we have on our evolution towards autonomous driving, and whether it's geofenced at first and then on all the roadways in the future. But it's going to be, or at least we believe, it's a very admirable approach to be building it piecewise. The last step, though, of all of this consumer trust is to extend its reach. It's no longer just about the car. And you were talking about CAVs, connected automated vehicles, a little bit in your opening. That's an area that I think is also very exciting, both for electric vehicles and for autonomous vehicles, is that we're able to now connect our vehicle to what's around us. And I like to run, I like to cycle, so I'm not always behind the wheel of a steel automobile. Sometimes I'm occupying a lane of the road in a much more vulnerable position. And by having connected automated vehicle technology or connected advanced driver assistance systems, we're able to see vehicles and pedestrians, vehicles and cyclists play well together because we're tracking them with more than just a radar, a camera, a LiDAR, but we're now using connectivity to tell us where certain obstacles are, where certain danger points might be. We've really amped it up with our intelligent infrastructure efforts as well, because we find that a majority of collisions are happening at intersections, and we know that there's a lot of opportunity with the sensing capability we have from those building blocks we started with if we put them on the infrastructure. And so by doing this, educating, evolving from our building blocks, and then extending beyond the vehicle, we're going to bring up the consumer trust in automated vehicle systems.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. So appreciate that. Great start point. So now you've seen the 3 speakers or panelist participants that we know are wearing pants. Now it's time to go to those that are somewhere else. And we suspect they're in shorts and sandals and very relaxed and enjoying things. Our next speaker is Brian Reamer. Brian is a research scientist at MIT Age Lab. And Brian, if we can bring you up, please welcome to Car Management Briefing Seminars, and I hope the weather is nice in Boston as it is here in Michigan.
Oh, I'm hiding in northern New Hampshire at the moment. And it isn't too nice here today. It's pretty cloudy and pretty raw. So I appreciate allowing me to dial in today and share a few words with everyone. And I think there is a lot of relationship between our current trends in electrification and EVs and AVs. And one of those most important trends is that in both the connected autonomous, straight AV, collaborative driving, active safety, and battery electric vehicle markets, we continue to set consumer expectations for these technologies well and above what we can achieve from an engineering perspective. We see some of the news out of DC this morning, targeting 50%, vehicles sold, and in under a decade, we beat EVs. The consumer's expectations of these technologies is really what we need to be thinking of shaping. For decades now, we've been asking consumers, what do they think, what do they feel, what do they want? And we've reached a point in the last decade or so where it's less about what do people want and more about what do they understand and what are they using. So about a decade ago, it began to talk about the foundations for what's become the Advanced Vehicle Technologies Consortium, where we're really beginning to work with about 20 different automotive stakeholders at the moment, understand how people are leveraging production level automation systems in the wild today. And we're really learning that our expectations of what people are doing in these systems at some point are well grounded. But in many situations, the specifications and designs we are developing aren't understood well enough to get proper and effective use out of the technologies we're placing on the road. So how do we mitigate the misuse and enhance the appropriate use of the technologies we're building? Well, we set this stream for the future of mobility on a connected automated mobility framework, and I'm a staunch advocate over the next century we will get there. The reality is, as engineers, we're going to have to work in a much more iterative, incremental framework. So if we're talking about electrification, that means huge investments in infrastructure and charging. Lots of people who are talking about the context of an electric vehicle, but where will I charge it really hinders acceptance now and will continue to for several years to come. The bigger question is not one of BEVs, but carbon in general. Hybrid technologies and even ICEs are going to make sense in certain environments. Ignoring that now is deflating what will become key aspects of consumer interest and consumer demand in the not so distant future. When we look to the roads today, we are continuing to set consumer expectations for automation well and above what we're going to achieve. We look at the Lyft Ford partnership with Argo the other day, and we read the fine print, and we're talking about deploying 1,000 automated vehicles in a test environment in the next 5 years. The headlines is, we're going to have automation on Main Street tomorrow. And I think we need to figure that out and really build from the foundations. Because as we begin to look at what consumers are doing in real vehicles and really think more deeply about it, what we're looking for is comfortable, convenient, and safe mobility. Many of us are very concerned with the environmental aspects, and that's something I feel very strongly that the government side, DC and states needs to be pushing to a stronger degree. But at the end of the day, I want a comfortable, safe, and convenient way to get from point A to point B. We have many of the tools here today in active safety and augmented and assistive driving systems, and hopefully at some point in a not so distant future, higher level automation systems to begin to take upon some of those trips. But how do we leverage the technology we have, connect that to the consumer more effectively, and ensure we are benefiting from these technologies today? So when we begin to look at the data cohesively, we begin to learn that there's often a disconnect between the engineering specifications, the designer's mental model of these systems, and how consumers are actually coming to leverage them. Education is a big piece. The dealership perhaps not equipped today to educate consumers well enough. When we look at educated consumers and we look at them in naturalistic studies, out of the team at MIT, we know there's a lot of headroom. And this headroom cannot be achieved by one organization continuing to try to plow forward alone. The entire automotive industry needs to be thinking about how to collaborate more effectively together to solve some of these big problems. managing consumer expectations across the industry, and working together to really craft the complexities of scientific outcomes that are needed to move the industry forward. And again, thank you very much for having me join in here virtually today.
Brian, thanks. Some wonderful remarks there. And I find it fascinating how expectations do not match reality. I have an associate, Eric Paul Dennis, who does for 7 years now, I think, has kind of tracked announcements from companies and what they're promising to do or what they're saying they're going to do versus the reality of that. And I sarcastically or cynically call it promises made, promises broken. But the consumers, whether it be EVs or AVs, are often believing that it's there, it's ready, it's easy. These are hard things to work on. Mark, you've from our next speaker, Mark Rosekind, has actually been up here on the stage before, and it's good to see you again, Mark. But Mark, you've approached it from the government side and now from the corporate side. So please welcome Mark Rosekind, Chief Safety Innovation Officer, Zoox.
Thank you, and you're right. I have a very broad perspective on a lot of these issues, which is why let me actually start with what everybody in this room and on this call know. We have new technology that has the potential to enhance safety, mobility, and sustainability in a once-in-a-generation opportunity here. And all of that, especially is, for me, I have all those acronyms, NASA, NTSB, NHTSA, that I live on top of. Having 100 people die a day is just unacceptable for us, right? I mean, we need something different. And I think, again, we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity to use new technology. We can keep doing everything that works. We can enhance safe systems, but the new tool we have is technology. How do we apply that for our society to advance the most significant ways, again, in a generation, in safety, mobility, and sustainability? So to your question, it has been fascinating for me to actually be in a developer at Zoox, working at creating that trifecta of enhancing safety, mobility, sustainability. So let me just give you a moment about Zoox, which gives you a sense of how you can actually take a lot of these concepts and turn them into reality. So at Zoox, we basically believe you need an integrated autonomous system. And so we're pretty unique in this space because we're actually building a vehicle from the ground up, specifically purpose-built for autonomy. So that means it's got carriage seating. It's actually built for the rider, not the driver. It's a level 4, level 5 vehicle. It's all electric, bi-directional, sliding doors, something you can do when you build a vehicle from the ground up. The second is we're developing the AI, going right to level 4, level 5. No steering wheel, no brakes. We know about that 94% of human choices and errors that contribute to crashes. And so we're building that AI to go right to the level 4, level 5. And then third, basically operating the fleet, again, of all electric vehicles. And so if you haven't seen it, in December, we revealed that vehicle. It's not a show car. It's real. It's being crash tested on tracks, et cetera. And then we just came out also with a safety report. Because now that we've shown it in December, we've come out with a second safety report that actually highlights, revealing that we've got about 100 safety innovations built into the vehicle. 9 of them are highlighted in the report. This is a way for us to go from just talking about all of these opportunities to how do you actually create them in concrete ways. So I hope people will also take a look at that report. It actually talks about some of our innovations in driver control, our design philosophy of no single point of failure, which is right out of aviation safety levels, and rider protections. So there are concrete ways that you can see how you can build safety innovations into the system. So I hope you get to Zoox.com, take a look at that, because I think for all of our discussions, you have to look at what does this actually mean when it gets to the road, which is why the last thing I just want to comment on is I'm going to add 3 more to the trust argument that we're already having. Because I think, apropos this panel, a critical element for autonomous vehicles and EV to some extent is going to be trust. And you heard 3 aspects of trust for consumers. I want to give us 3 more. I think we're going to need data, transparency, and experience. And I say that because I think we're going to need data which kind of fits into the education process you heard before. We're going to need data so that when we say, well, these are safe, what do you mean? And we're going to be able to show that. The second is transparency, which is you got to show people that data. You got to do the education. I mean, we have so much information already. People don't even know what they've got in their cars today, right? As far as the ADAS kinds of things that are available. And the third is experience, which is the challenge we really have today, especially for level 4, level 5. And I think you've already heard it. And that is realistically when these things are going to be at your corner where you can use an app to go get a ride. And so we have a challenge now because people are not fully exposed, getting the experience of like, what's the deal here? That was a great ride. It's going to take a while for us to get there. But I think we got to keep the big context in mind, what the potential is. We have to think very concretely about how these translate into actual vehicles and systems. And finally, trust is going to be critical. I think at the center, basically, of seeing the adoption of all these into the future.
Mark, thank you very much. It's a great perspective. Again, your history back at the government, understanding how fundamentally important safety is, and seeing that show through in the work you all are doing at Zoox, and as you ride down this pathway, it's really a helpful point of view. Our final speaker, and Maya, we finally got to you, I thank you for your patience, is Maya Pendius, who is co-founder, Chief Executive Officer of Humanising Autonomy. Maya, welcome to the stage virtually.
Thanks, Brad. Whether we're talking about EV, AV, or infrastructure applications, essentially any application that incorporates new technologies and artificial intelligence, we're facing similar challenges. It is a fact that we're interacting more and more with machines, but machines don't understand people. And that's scary for consumers, that's scary, intransparent for many alike. And it's a problem that's evident across industries. So failure to identify and understand and adequately respond to human behavior. We're talking about the street, a densely populated urban environment, a factory environment, or any other environment where you picture people is a major factor to the delayed rollout of autonomous vehicles. But it's not only hindering the future adoption of AV, but causes huge challenges today. So on one hand, we're talking about safety issues, high accidents and liability rates by driver assistance systems, autonomous vehicles, and sort of vehicles that are not really able to accurately understand what everyone is doing or likely to be doing around a vehicle in a road environment. So we have the safety perspective. We have the high false alarm and false positive rates. We're seeing is a current driver assistance system, a forward collision warning system, really adequately equipped to understand, is this person on the side we're actually intend to cross the path of the vehicle, intending to do X. Again, false alarms hindering a lot of the ROI, whereas adoption, and then also the consumer trust that people have. So we have a huge issue around consumer trust and adoption rates with systems that people don't understand what they're doing, what the AI, what the technology behind the system is actually capable of and doing and helping them. And we also have privacy and ethical concerns. AI, artificial intelligence, is not explainable or transparent. It's one of the biggest challenges, in my view, around adoption of automated technologies, creating systems where the decision-making is understandable, where the reasoning is understandable, they're transparent, explainable, we understand the data streams, and so on. So those are essentially four of the key points that, in our view, hinder adoption of automation, but also essentially hindering the adoption of current technology that we have on our roads today. So let me introduce Humanising Autonomy in a few words. We are a computer vision company. We focus specifically on people, human-centric AI, building a behavior prediction platform that is able to understand people behavior, people actions, predict human behavior, and how people relate in various environments from any video, from any camera. That is really something that adds to safety, productivity, trust, and ethics. It's really important to provide an explainable, interpretable artificial intelligence system that people can relate to and can understand, but it also that helps promote a step-by-step approach towards automation. On the way towards full autonomy, We have safety technologies in commercial vehicles, any vehicles today, from forward collision to blind spot monitoring, to parking assists, to VTRX infrastructure, to dash cams and others, where we're able to feed into and provide a safety layer for the driver, for the pedestrian, for the operator alike, and really providing computer vision behavior AI that is able to that's relatable, it's able to increase the safety and productivity as today, while at the same time working on the ethical AI perspective, making sure to be very, very open, very transparent around how artificial intelligence is created and it's implemented. We firmly believe that it's around that level of education that will help adoption rates from driver assistance up to AV and AV. To really accelerate incremental steps of technology adoption, very clear and transparent guidelines around data usage, around what the scope of this technology is, what the benefit for the consumer is, and of course, data that backs it up. Which I think is one of the most important pieces to make consumers feel safe and understand what is going on in the technologies around them. So really an incremental step. Thank you very much.
Maya, thank you so much for finishing that up. Some wonderful thoughts, opening thoughts. Remember, questions on the Boomset app. And Brian, if I could, I want to start virtually with you across. You brought up this point of, we started this discussion about we need to really make people aware of the current versus the future. How do we do that? What's the first step from your research that shows this is how we can communicate to those consumers for EVs, AVs, also for EVs, and I'll come back here. How do we communicate to them? Here's where we are, while still building enthusiasm for it, while still giving them an honest explanation.
So that's a really good question. And yes, the vanilla answer is education, but the vanilla answer is not so simple. Long about a decade ago, we did some work for the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, in which we were asked to come up with a conceptual model in which we could begin to rate active safety systems. And we really began to form the framework of that, and that really led to the Advanced Vehicle Technology Consortium, is that we have to be transparent and honest with the potential. The potential for connected, automated, electrified vehicles is huge, but we have to also provide a realistic grounding of what we have today. And we have to kind of frame both pieces of that equation together. We can't just talk about one and ignore the other. And when we look in some of the vehicle studies we're doing today at providing a level of education about the systems in the car that is of magnitudes greater than a dealership is today, we realize that even with that, even with a couple hours focused on core technologies, consumers don't have enough information to benefit from and utilize them as efficiently as we would hope, and misuse seems to still abound. So the education context here is far greater than any one company can solve. It requires an enormous collaborative push forward to make sure we are level setting. Now, if I look to the automation in automated vehicle space today, the context of full self-driving that the industry laughs about, moving around our roads and advertise, I see Mark smiling here. Well, that is creating an expectation gap in what Zoots and other L4 providers are trying to create, and causing a level of misuse and overuse of all of the technologies that the manufacturers represented in the audience today are creating and building. So, the gap that is driving day in and day out is only getting larger. So the longer we let it go, the harder it's going to be to fix. We need to be honest to both sides.
So Maya, I want to come back to you in a moment with this thought, but Mark, Brian mentioned Zoox on this. How does Zoox communicate to the customer the excitement, the enthusiasm, the wonderful opportunity, but the challenge?
Well, and I think some of those things I alluded to, but I'll be more concrete very quickly. That's where, again, having both data and transparency are pretty critical. So, we've committed, for example, to putting out a series of safety reports. Like everyone else, we put out that first one that gave the general context, but our more recent one goes into much more detail. And I think people need to see that. The other that I talked about was experience. And again, I think, we have a lot of opportunity to give people demo rides and actually see these vehicles. You got to touch them, feel them, et cetera. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. It's kind of part of what Brian's alluding to is, people need hands-on, literally butts in the seat to get that ride where, in 30 seconds, it's like, what's the deal here? This is great. I can read now. I can sleep now. I can do, right? If you're fully automated. If you're not, then, you need to understand what the capabilities as well as limitations are. So for us, it's exactly what I described. We got to give them information or data and be transparent about it wherever possible, give experience. The last two things I'll just say, this is why organizations like PAVE, Partners for AV Education, are critical, these neutral, independent voices. And the other thing I just got to highlight, the reason I was smiling with Brian, I think he really nailed it, which is we can talk about education, but it's clear there's a lot of work to do with, just the basics like labels that are used, right? The industry confuses people by the range of different things we call stuff. So I think that's another great example. You want people to trust things, we got to come up with consistency on how we actually label and apply those labels effectively.
Maya, your company looks at getting people used to this, getting them to, or understanding how they might use these things. How do we get that perspective where we think about, they understand that it's great, that it's new, but it's not quite there, but it's coming?
Yeah, so our company focuses on actually implementing this level of artificial intelligence in current systems, meaning, for instance, take a dashcam that is able to provide advanced alerts based on advanced behavior analytics, predictive analytics, or an aftermarket device with telematic systems, and a lot in the tracking and commercial vehicles. We are providing a safe environment for drivers by enhancing the vision. And I think a lot of the education and transparency component here is around helping the consumer understand what the value add for them is. We're not talking about replacing immediately. We're not jumping ahead to level 5. But what we're talking about is providing systems that are able to complement someone's vision, someone's experience. So a lot of what we do is we're implemented in a variety of leads, really helping drivers prevent accidents, helping drivers be more efficient and safer around cities, is to back it up with data. So how can you complement the driver? How can you show how much earlier you're able to perceive risk? How many are you able to prevent a near miss, prevent an accident in the best, and also operate around dense environments by essentially advanced hazard perception and enhancing vision. So a lot of what we do is, of course, show the real time, show how this can be prevented. Either it's installed in the car, so a lot of it is demo rides and so on, or also just public platform and dashboards created for consumers, created for customers, showing what the actual value add is and really having numerical benefits there. This is how much how much safer you can be. This is how much more efficient you can be, to get people understand how artificial intelligence will actually complement and help them do their job better, have a safer ride, and have a better experience. Which is why we're focusing so much on the immediate application, because those are the ones that will pave the way for long-term autonomy. If people trust now, they will trust autonomy as it emerges.
Beautiful. So Zach, to close out the EV part of this, and then Steve will come to the EV part. But you mentioned that Continental has a social media campaign for awareness and communication. Can you talk about that, and then I'll follow up with the question?
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, education is, the vanilla answer, but it's also the challenging one. You've got to have different approaches. And the Safely There campaign is one way that we can try to get some consistency around the messaging we have for these safe systems. So it's great when you learn how to use a hashtag, but to use a hashtag properly and call out really what's supposed to be filed in that classification of Safely There is an amazing way for us to kind of build out our, not just our brand, but our building blocks that I talked about earlier of these safe systems we have already. As Maya was saying, it's good to put these applications out there right now so that people can start trusting them. Safely There is already calling out different features that we have on our vehicles today, how they operate, stories from one of us or each of us that have used these systems to help ourselves achieve a safer chance of mobility. And I think that the social media aspect is not to be overlooked here, because I was also working in the early days on advanced driver assistance systems for adaptive cruise control, and we were writing the owner's manual. And that was our way of educating. We thought, okay, we'll put how this works in the owner's manual. We now compare the automotive industry or the mobility industry to consumer electronics. And I don't know too many people that have read the owner's manual for their iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy, but it's just that way. We can't rely on an owner's manual. We can't rely on these black and white text. But we also can't assume that our consumers are ignorant and don't want or have an appetite for this data, as we were talking about earlier too. So it's okay to be transparent with it as well. And I think the Safely There campaign is one way for us to be candid about what the vehicles are capable of and let people tell their own stories about how it improved the safety in a real world application.
Very good, thanks. So Steve, we've talked AV.
Yeah.
You and I can talk EV probably all day, but that's, so the same kind of questions for EV. You know, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of enthusiasm. There's still only 2% growing of market share out there. How do you communicate the realities and the positives and the negatives?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's, and I like what Brian was saying around kind of the gap here, and it's a gap between possibility and plausibility. If you really think about it as an engineer, as a scientist, as a programmer, the objective is to stretch the boundaries as far as we can in order to prove the technology. We have been working with Clemson University on the Indy Autonomous Challenge. If you're not familiar with it, look it up. But it's designing a race car, an Indy light race car that is capable of going 180 miles per hour autonomously on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. That's to test possibility, not plausibility. We're not going to be expecting autonomous vehicles to go 180 miles per hour anytime soon. But it's the stretching the boundaries of what we can do in order to then start applying to commercial applications of what we should do. And that's where the gap has to be managed, because I agree, if we don't manage that properly, we're going to get expectations of things that will not be plausible in uncontrolled environments. And that's what we unfortunately live in with most autonomous applications today. On EV, I think it's going to be real constraint-based in many cases, right? I think if we continue down the path we are right now in gaining consumer acceptance of the technologies and the ability to drive, sustainable vehicles, with relatively infrequent charge-ups, the infrastructure becomes a really strong stopping point, and it would be a real shame if the infrastructure becomes the impediment for EV evolution, right? The technology is what we've been proving, and now we got to get to a point where the infrastructure to support that technology doesn't become necessarily the constraint. And we can't solve that overnight. That is just, it takes time, it takes a lot of money to build that infrastructure out, but that's just part of what we're going to have to do. And in many cases, it's a blessing that some of these technologies take time to mature to where humans accept the technology.
So let's keep on the EV theme for a moment, and I can come back to the AV theme again. They seem forever linked. Your research on EV uptake, suburban, urban versus rural, and kind of the lack of infrastructure on the rural side potentially, which AV team, that's coming to you in a moment too, so.
Yeah, we did split it out as far as metropolitan, small, medium, and rural. And there was gaps between that. I think there's higher expectations in the early stages of electric infrastructure in metropolitan and medium-sized cities. I think that the expectation is probably a little bit more managed in rural areas, knowing that I can't probably get the full infrastructure that I need. But you also need to realize that when we get out into the rural areas, the number one charging location will be a garage. And this becomes a little bit of a problem in the urban areas, right? So right now, a lot of the EVs, the majority of the EVs being sold, the primary charging location is the personal garage. And once we start getting more proliferation and we need the parking lot or the street charging, that's where we're going to have to start testing that infrastructure even further.
So Brian, we'll come back to you on the challenge of developing this infrastructure or this AV capable world outside of level 4 geofenced. Is this for the long term, the expectation and the reality that it's geofenced? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergies here between AV and EV in particular, because we're looking at huge infrastructure problems. And the EV side of building charging, even in an urban infrastructure, is not a partial, few-year effort. It's a multi-decade effort to build its EV infrastructure. The same thing around the AV infrastructure in the context of moving both the infrastructure and the technology to build robo-taxis. Now, we need to be looking much more about how we can use data around what's occurring today to evolve both of these technologies forward. And it's an evolution of electrification and autonomy on our roads, really from the bottom up, that it's the only thing that we have the resources in our hands to build forward from. Even if L4, L5 autonomy shows up, it's not going to be here and change how we live and move overnight. So, we come back to what I mentioned earlier, right? At DC yesterday, looking for 50% of the vehicles sold being electric vehicles in 2030. The infrastructure for that's not going to exist. How do we look towards something much more salient? How do we look for, a 2% improvement or increase in AV sales per year, 3%, whatever the number's got to be? Quite frankly, the same thing for safety. How do we look for a 2% year-over-year or 5% year-over-year reduction in fatalities on our roads? Set realistic goals that are stretches, much like CAFE did for fuel economy, and push forward incrementally, where the consumer gets a transparent understanding year by year of how this system is moving and evolving forward, and what do we need to get there. And every step of the way, we need to look at using data about what's going on in cars, not data about what people think. Our perceptions are so mismatched from reality. We need to look at what's going on in cars and use that to hone our engineering specifications moving forward. So let's get out of the fairy tale side. The potential is clearly there. And let's hit the boots running and setting some realistic, achievable, strong goals to push AV and EV penetration forward from the bottom up. And at some point, you're going to see some of the level 4 technologies begin to creep up the same way.
Maya, I saw you shaking your head, agreeing. Any thoughts, additions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one hand, I absolutely agree on incremental push forward, but also I think regulation plays an incredibly important role. Things that help people understand how technology can have a societal benefit, improve safety, reduce road casualties. I'm thinking of Vision Zero mandates that most major cities have committed to. There's still a longer time horizon. So Vision Zero is a great initiative, but it's a long time horizon. What can be achieved in a shorter time frame? Or even safety regulations, such as in Europe, 2022, vulnerable road user safety for any commercial vehicle mandated to bring casualties down. Things like that are understandable to people, how their lives now can be improved, can be made safe, are incredibly important. I also think that the taxonomy of AV or the nomenclature, how do you make people understand what we're actually talking about and what needs to be achieved in order to see a high adoption of autonomous vehicles on the road is incredibly important. At the moment, a lot of the terminologies are very, very confusing. I don't think they're really relatable to people. I'm thinking of things like operation design domains, what needs to be achieved, what are the safety levels that we need to hit in order to see a certain level of autonomy, a certain autonomy deployment in a city, for instance. What is it? And essentially traceable, broken down to bits and bytes that people can understand. At the same time, of course, talk about the bigger picture, level 4, level 5 at scale. But what are the small steps that we need to hit in order to get there? And I think that will get a lot of commitment and conviction from the general public.
So one of the challenges of a short session is that we are almost out of time, which is too bad because there's so much more to talk about here and so much great stuff. You've all been fabulous. I'd like to maybe go in reverse here and start with Maya on the virtual side. Any closing thoughts on this? The takeaway, a lesson learned, something we need to know going forward on how to get these vehicles better perspective on these vehicles and adoption.
Yeah, I think what I absolutely agree with my co-panelists here is on one hand, the transparency piece, making technology more transparent, highlighting the data and the ethical approach of technology. and the incremental, making malleable goals, understandable goals about how safety and how life and society can be and will be improved by EV, by AV, by safety systems, driver assistance systems, to make it understandable, and with that used to educate the public. So yeah, that would be my takeaway.
And Mark, I'd have loved to spend a half hour talking about NCAP, and how that may change in the current, but we don't get that time. Any quick closing thoughts from you on the subject?
Yes, I think we need to be patient, and we absolutely need to keep safety the imperative, and all of us need to get informed and educated.
So the good news is they just gave us 98 more minutes, it looks like, right? So we got time. I should not have said that and said, Brian, go ahead and come. Yeah, Brian, maybe not 98 minutes worth, but please, some closing thoughts.
Yeah, about 3 years ago, I did a TEDx talk focused on the automation issues. And I think I talked a lot in that TEDx talk about the need for public-private partnerships and the government to come together with industry and begin to forge this road forward collaboratively. We need to get realistic expectations in front of the consumer. We need industry to work together. We need government's help to pave the roads, set the infrastructure, educate, and can't let either of these two real important pieces continue to function independently. We need to be talking. We need to be working together in new and innovative ways if we're going to get this job done. And I'm going to echo Mark's thoughts. To me, it's not about environment. That's second fiddle. How do we take a bite out of the 100 people that are being killed today on our nation's roads? Let's forget it. Let's get the industry together and start looking at what people are doing and start using the technology and tools we have more effectively.
Thank you. Zach.
He's right. I mean, the closing remarks I would have is almost echoing that. The Safely There campaign, I should mention, it's not something I own or we own. We wanted to basically use this as an opportunity for all of us to share a story about how we're incrementally already making changes and educate. Again, we're talking about humans here, humans' lives here, and we need to make sure that they're up to speed with what we're actually capable of doing and what we're really trying to do with their vehicles, so that they're able to reap the most benefits, and that all of us playing on the sidewalks and in the intersections nearby are able to also contribute or benefit from these systems.
And Steve, it wasn't only a few minutes ago we started with you.
We got 98 minutes. No, it's
90. Oh, darn.
Well, no, I guess I would just say, the future is here. We do have to be patient. We need to make sure we roll these technologies out and get the infrastructure caught up, but it has to be done in a very safe and responsible manner. But we are here. The technology is here.
So to all five of you, fabulous stuff. Thank you so much. We have a couple, 2 or 3 more hours of stuff we could really cover. So maybe next year the world's in a better place. We come back here and we spend a couple hours doing this. Thank you. I look down here, I'm sorry, to the 3 remotely, thank you so much for joining us. To you two, thank you so much. And to you all, thank you.